where I buried the medals. Something bloomed. It's a place I never thought I'd return to. They told me the ground wouldn't remember. That time smooths everything over like wind on sand. That even the weight of footsteps fades if no one dares to return. But I was never convinced by those easy truths. Some places remember better than people do. Some places never forget who you were when you last walked away. And now, as I stand at the edge of the field, the one just past the crooked willow, near the stones, we never moved, I feel something tugging, not at my body, but at whatever is still alive beneath my bones. The bus had left me at the edge of town, and I had walked the rest of the way with an old canvas bag slung over my shoulder. The same kind I carried the first time I left home. The roads had changed, smoother, quieter, more civilized, I suppose, but the silence was heavier now. Not the comforting silence of a sleeping village, but the kind that feels like a question waiting to be asked. Or maybe answered. There's a bench here now, right where the gate used to be. Someone carved initials into the side of it. Lovers, probably, or kids pretending to be. The tree I planted behind it, the one I never thought would take, is tall, now, strong, defiant. Funny how the weakest things tend to grow when you're not watching. I reached out and touched its bark, rough and cool beneath my fingertips, as if it too had aged while I was away. Quiet part of me whispered, "You made it." I didn't come back for a ceremony. There won't be flags or speeches. The war I carried doesn't have a monument. It lives in moments, smells, in quiet nights where you wake up sweating with someone's name in your mouth and no idea how long you were crying. It lives in the things you don't say at dinner tables and in the long pauses between, "How was your day?" and "Fine." And it lives here, most of all, where I left the medals. I had once thought they mattered, that maybe they'd mean something to my father, to my children one day, to some future version of myself who could finally believe he was brave. But medals don't make you brave. They don't tuck you in when the nightmares come. They don't tell the full story. They shine in glass boxes while the rest of the story rots underground. So I buried them. It wasn't dramatic. There was no storm, no lightning in the distance, no cinematic moment of clarity. Just me, a rusted spade, and a piece of earth soft enough to open. I remember wrapping them in my old service jacket, the one that still smelled like iron and smoke, folding it carefully like I used to fold letters to my mother. I didn't even mark the spot. I thought I'd forget where it was. I didn't. It's strange, isn't it? How your body remembers what your mind pretends to let go. My feet walked straight here, like they'd never left. The path curved slightly, avoiding the roots that always tried to trip us during drills. The stone still sits crooked where we used to sit after training. My hands began to tremble, not from age, but recognition, the kind of shaking that comes not from fear, but from being too close to something you thought you could live without. I stood for a long time before kneeling. The soil was different now, richer, darker. There were flowers I didn't remember, planting little wild things with violet petals and golden centers, dancing gently in the breeze. I brushed one with the back of my hand and whispered, "I didn't leave you here," but they didn't answer. They just kept blooming. I didn't bring a shovel this time, just my hands. I didn't come to dig them up anyway. I just wanted to know if the ground still remembered. And it did. Not by giving back the medals, but by giving something else. These flowers, they only grow here, I checked. Not in the neighbor's yard, not near the old barracks, not even by the lake where we used to fish on Sundays. Just here, right where I buried the weight I no longer wanted to carry. And maybe that's the point. Maybe things bloom exactly where you let go, not where you win, not where you earn something, but where you finally release it. I sat down beside the tree, letting my back rest against its solid trunk. and I closed my eyes. The wind moved slowly across the field like breath. I could hear the faint hum of bees, the distant rustle of feathers, wings maybe, or just memory, and something softened inside me. I took the letter from my bag, the one I never sent. It was old, now, creased and faded, dressed to know. One, or maybe two, myself. The ink had bled in spots, either from rain or tears, and the handwriting looked younger than I remembered. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I knew what it said. Every word had been buried with those metals. For years, I thought healing meant forgetting, letting the past dissolve into silence. But sitting here now, surrounded by these unexpected blooms, I wonder if healing is something different. Maybe it's what happens when you return, not to rewrite the story, but to witness what grew from it, what survived, what still waits for you, quietly, beneath the surface. I leaned forward and pressed my palm flat against the earth. Warm, alive, it pulsed softly under my skin, like a sleeping animal. I don't know how long I stayed like that. Minutes, hours. Time bends in places like this. It doesn't demand anything. Just let you be. And for the first time in decades, I let myself be too. I didn't need to speak aloud, but something in me whispered anyway. I'm sorry for leaving you here alone. Whether I meant the metals, the letter, or some forgotten part of myself, I don't know. Maybe all of it. The field didn't answer, but the flowers nodded in the breeze, and the tree above me shed a single leaf onto my lap. That was enough. I'll sleep here tonight. Not because I have nowhere else to go, but because for the first time in years, I want to stay. I want to listen to what the silence has to say. I want to see what the stars look like from the place I once fled. And maybe, just maybe, I want to dream, not of battles or regrets, but of something softer, of petals opening in the dark, of roots growing quietly when no one is watching, where I buried the metals. Something bloomed, and maybe tomorrow I'll find the courage to bloom too. The night I slept on the ground that remembered me, it was long past twilight when I laid down beside the tree. I didn't plan it. Todd meant to walk back to the inn, or at least to the edge of town, but something in my chest tightened when I stood up, as if my body were quietly asking, why? Leave again so soon? So I spread my old coat on the grass, right next to the crooked root that curled like a question mark beneath the soil. The field had already begun to cool, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and wildflowers. It smelled like memory. Not the sharp kind, but the sort that lingers softly, like the last note of a lullaby died above me. The stars returned, slowly, hesitant at first, as if unsure they were still welcome. But they came, one by one, like names being remembered. I knew I wouldn't sleep easily. I never do. But there was no fear tonight, no shadows chasing me down a hallway of dreams. Just the stillness, deep and wide, like a quiet lake, waiting to be touched. I thought about the men I served with, ones who came back, the ones who didn't, and the ones who returned, but never really made it home. I thought about their voices and how I can't recall them clearly anymore. Only the way they used to say my name, not like the officers did, clipped and formal, but like it belonged to someone they trusted, someone who would keep watch while they slept. It's a strange thing to be remembered by ghosts, to carry their unfinished sentences like folded maps in your pocket. And yet, out here, lying under the same sky we used to stare at through the cracks in our helmets, I didn't feel haunted. I felt accompanied, as if the ground itself was bearing witness, as if it had waited all this time to say, I saw you. Sometime in the night, I woke up to a soft sound. Not a footstep, not a voice, just a shift in the air, like something had moved through the tall grass near the edge of the trees. I didn't open my eyes, I just listened. And there it was again. The rustle of something small, curious, harmless, A fox, maybe. Or a deer. Or maybe just the wind. But I smiled because it felt like a visit. Like the land was checking in on me, making sure I hadn't left again. I spoke softly then, not to anything or anyone in particular. I'm still here. The quiet didn't argue. When the morning came, it wasn't with drama. No sudden golden beams or dramatic bird calls. Just a gentle shift in temperature. The way light slowly convinces darkness to give up. I sat up and stretched my arms, and something popped in my shoulder, a familiar reminder of time past. The flowers were still there. More of them, maybe. Or maybe I just saw them differently now. They weren't decorative, they were defiant, fragile things that had no business growing here, and yet they had. I walked to the stream beyond the Kent Hill. I used to bathe there when I was younger, okay? Back when I still believed that war was something you left behind when the fighting stopped. The water was cold, but clean. Cupped it in my hands and splashed it on my face. The shock of it, waking parts of me I'd long let sleep. My reflection stared back from the ripples. Older, yes, but softer too. Less afraid, less angry, less needing to prove anything. When I stood, I noticed something just off the edge of the water. A stone, flat, smooth, and marked. By man, but by time. The kind of stone that seems to belong in someone's pocket. I picked it up and turned it in my palm. It was warm from the sun already, okay? Without thinking, I placed it in the pocket of my coat. Not as a souvenir, but as a weight, a reminder, a small truth I could carry. The village hadn't changed much. It's the same narrow roads, the same lopsided sign that read, "Welcome, traveler." Only now the paint had faded and the letters curled at the edges like tired smiles. I passed the old bakery, long closed, but I could still smell the memory of bread. And when I walked by the window of the tailor shop, I saw my reflection again, standing where I once stood, years ago, in a uniform that didn't quite fit. I looked away at the square. I found the bench where the older men used to sit. In the mornings, there were different men now. Younger, louder, less still. They didn't look up when I passed. That was fine. They didn't need to see me. This wasn't their memory. I bought a cup of tea from a cart run by a woman with eyes like mine. Tired, but kind. She didn't ask why I was here. She just smiled and poured. That was enough. I carried the cup back to the edge of the field and sat on the same bench I had passed yesterday. The flowers were glowing slightly in the rising sun. A few bees hovered lazily over them, drunk on whatever it is bees chase. And then, without planning it, I said his name, out loud, for the first time in years. Samuel. The name floated into the air like a bird, unsure of its wings. It didn't echo, it just landed softly and stayed. I don't know what made me say it. Maybe the warmth of the tea. Maybe the way the light fell across the roots. Or maybe it was just time. He was the first one I lost. Not in battle, no. He made it through most of the war. He even wrote to his mother every week, like clockwork. But something inside him broke just before we came home. Not a loud break, not a dramatic one, just a soft cracking. It's the kind you can only hear if you're standing very, very close. And I was. He gave me his watch on the last night, said he didn't want to know what time it was anymore. I never asked why. I just took it. I still have it, somewhere. But I don't wear it. Not because it's broken, but because some things aren't meant to be worn. They're meant to be remembered. That night, under the tree, I thought I heard his voice, not words, just the shape of it. It's the sound of someone clearing their throat the way he used to when he was about to say something real. It didn't scare me. It didn't make me cry. It just made me still. I think that's what grief becomes eventually. Not an absence, not a hole, but a stillness. It's a sacred quiet where someone used to be. And if you sit with it long enough, It becomes a place you can visit. It's a place where something blooms. That's why I'm still here. Not because I have nowhere else to go, but because this place, this patch of earth where I buried my medals, my stories, my shame, it became a garden, not of flowers necessarily, but of peace, of memory, of truth I can sit beside without flinching. Sometimes I think about digging them up again. The medals, I mean. Sometimes I think about holding them in my hands and telling them I forgive them, that it wasn't their fault, that they didn't ask to carry so much meaning. But then I look at the flowers, so I realize they've already done their part. They've already become what they were supposed to be, so I let them sleep. Tonight, I'll sleep again beneath the tree, not because I'm tired, though I am, but because I want to hear what the silence says when you don't interrupt it. I want to hear the names the stars still remember. I want to feel the wind move through the branches and pretend, just for a moment, that nothing was lost. It's only transformed, because where I buried the medals, something bloomed. And maybe I did. To the letter I finally wrote. I didn't mean to stay a third night, but when the time came to leave, I couldn't make my feet move. It wasn't reluctance. It wasn't fear. It was something gentler, like when you pause on the last page of a book, because you're not quite ready to say goodbye to the voice that carried you through it. The tree, the bench, the smell of tea rising with the morning mist. It all felt more familiar than my own home. I suppose that's the strange thing about peace. It rarely arrives with fanfare. It doesn't knock. It doesn't demand. It just begins to settle into you quietly until one morning you realize it's been there for some time. Hey, and I think that's what happened to me. The medals didn't need to be found. The story didn't need to be rewritten. It only needed to be held, without shame, without judgment, just held. That morning, I sat with the old notebook I had carried all these years. Pages torn, corners curled, ink faded, like breath on glass. Most of the pages were empty. I had never been much of a writer, always more comfortable carrying things in silence. But the quiet of this place had started to loosen something in my hands. So I opened to the first blank page, and without planning what to say, I began. Dear Samuel, I wrote, it's been far too long since I let your name live outside my chest. The words came slowly at first, like reluctant guests, but then, like water long held behind a dam, they poured. I wrote of the night he handed me his watch, of the silence we shared, sitting shoulder to shoulder, not saying anything because we already knew. I wrote of the way his absence shaped every day after, and how I'd convinced myself it wasn't fair to mourn what I couldn't fix. I wrote of the medals, buried not out of disrespect, but because they were too heavy to carry without breaking. I told him that I'd finally returned to the place where I'd laid them down, that the field had remembered, that something had grown. And I told him, maybe for the first time, that I was ready to let myself grow too. I signed it simply, with my name, no rank, no title. It's just me. And when I folded the letter, I didn't put it in my bag. I pressed it into the dirt beneath the flowers, right above where the medals rested. No envelope, no stone to mark the spot. Just trust that the earth knew what to do with it. I stood and looked out over the field. There was a warmth in the breeze now, even though the sky remained pale and cloudy. It wasn't summer yet, but the promise of it hovered in the air, a softness like breath waiting to become song. That's when I saw her. She was walking slowly, cautiously from the edge of the road, an older woman, scarf wrapped loosely around her shoulders, hands curled around the handle of a small wicker basket. I recognized her gait before I recognized her face. The way she carried herself, like she was used to holding things together for other people. When she reached the bench, she didn't speak right away, just looked at the flowers, then at me. You came back, she said. I nodded. So did they, I replied, motioning toward the blossoms at our feet. She sat beside me, and for a moment we simply breathed together, like two people who had once shared something important and were now remembering it in silence. Then she opened her basket. Inside, 2 mugs, a flask, and a paper bag tied with twine. I figured if I ever saw you here again, you'd want tea, she said. I smiled, softer than I had in years. You always did know. We poured the tea, passed the paper bag between us, each tearing off a piece of warm bread that tasted like memory. "Kay," I asked about the others. "Kay." She told me who had stayed, who had passed, who had left and never returned. I listened, not with the ache of loss, but with the reverence of someone being gifted with fragments of a larger story, a story that still mattered, even if I no longer lived at the center of it. "I visit this place often," she said. "But I never said, not until now." "Why now?" I asked. She sipped her tea and smiled. "Because you're here." I felt my eyes sting, not from sadness, but from being seen. It's a rare thing to be witnessed without needing to explain who you've become, to be allowed to be quiet without the world rushing in to fill the silence. She didn't ask what I had buried. She didn't need to. Her presence said, whatever it was, it mattered. Before she left, she reached into her pocket and handed me something wrapped in cloth. "He would have wanted you to have this," she said. I unfolded it slowly, his watch still ticking. "You kept it all this time?" She nodded. "I was waiting for you to stop running." I held the watch in my hand, the same hand that once let it go, and this time it felt right. Not as a burden, but as a rhythm, a quiet, living beat. I didn't put it on my wrist. I placed it beside the flowers, where the letter had gone. I whispered his name again, and I swear the wind answered. She left me with a hug that said more than words. And I stayed long after she disappeared down the path. That night, I didn't sleep under the tree. I slept beside the flowers, my back to the earth, my hands open to the stars. I dreamt of laughter, of voices around the campfire, of hands reaching out in the dark, not to pull away, but to hold. And in the dream, I heard Samuel's voice, clear and calm. "You did good." The next morning, I finally stood without hesitation. I stretched, dusted off my coat, and let the light wash over me like rain. I didn't take anything with me, not the medals, not the letter, not the watch, because none of it needed to be carried anymore. The flowers had roots now. The silence had bloomed, and so had I, where I buried the medals. Something bloomed, and for the first time in my life, I finally understood. So did I. The things that waited without asking. It's been 4 days now. 4 sunrises beneath the same sky I once marched under, with boots that didn't quite fit and a heart full of orders I never chose. It doesn't feel like I've stayed here. It feels like I've returned to something that never stopped waiting. Even the light feels familiar, not bright, not sharp, just ... honest, like it knows what it's falling on. This morning, I woke up before the birds, before the field rustled, before the breeze found its way through the trees. I sat beside the flowers in silence, and for the first time, I noticed how they leaned slightly east, as if remembering the sun before it even appeared. There's something sacred about that, the quiet expectation of warmth, not demanding it, preparing to receive. I've begun speaking aloud now, not loudly, not to anyone in particular, just letting the words exist. This place doesn't interrupt. It listens in a way people forget to do. Yesterday, I told the field about the day I came home from the war. Okay, not the parade. That wasn't for me. Not the medal ceremony. I skipped that. I told it about the way the floor creaked differently when I stepped into the house I no longer recognized. Told it about my daughter's confused eyes when I hugged her too tightly. My wife's careful silence when I refused to sleep with the lights off. I told it about the night I sat alone in the garage, still in uniform, holding a wrench like a weapon, because I couldn't stop expecting sirens. How I kept waiting for the sound of boots behind me. How it took 6 months before I laughed again, and even then, it startled me. The earth didn't respond, but the flowers shifted gently in the wind, and the bees hummed close by, and I knew I'd been heard. Later in the day, I walked into town again. This time, not to hide or observe from a distance, but to be seen, just a little. I wore my softest shirt, the one that still smells like cedar, and I left my coat folded on the bench, as if to say, I'll be back soon. The cafe is still there. Different owner. Same old chairs, still squeaky and unbalanced. I ordered a cup of black coffee and sat by the window. A boy at the next table glanced at me curiously. He must have been 10, maybe 11, that age, when curiosity isn't masked yet by shame. Hayes' mother told him not to stare, but I waved, and he came over anyway. "Are you a soldier?" he asked. "No," I said. "Not anymore." "But you were," he insisted. "You look like someone who was." I smiled, not because he was wrong, but because I could finally answer without flinching. "Yes, I was." He thought for a moment, then asked, "Did you win?" I took a long sip of coffee before answering. "No one really wins, son, but I made it home. That's something." He nodded, like he understood, even if he didn't, and before he returned to his table, he reached into his pocket and handed me a small wooden carving, a bird imperfect with one wing larger than the other. "I made this in class," he said. "You can have it." I held it carefully, as if it might take flight at any moment. "Thank you," I whispered. When they left, I watched them walk down the street together, her hand on his shoulder. He turned and waved once more. I stayed there for a while, not thinking, just feeling. That evening, back at the field, I placed the little bird beside the wildflowers near the pocket watch. It looked strange at first, man-made among the natural, but then I saw how it fit. It's the same way we carry our scars next to our laughter, the same way truth and tenderness don't cancel each other out, but live side by side when we let them. As the stars returned, I lit a small candle and set it on a flat stone near the bench. I used to think candles were for mourning. I think they're for remembering and for thanking. The flame flickered as the wind passed through, and in that golden, dancing light, I whispered a quiet roll call of names. Not all of them, just the ones who still visit me in dreams. The ones I never got to say goodbye to. One by one, I offered a memory to each name. Something small, a joke, a story, a moment, silence we shared. And then I paused, held my breath, and let the candle go out naturally. No puff of breath, no forcing the end, just surrender. I lay back on the grass and placed both hands on my chest, feeling the steady rhythm beneath my ribs. That used to scare me, that feeling like it reminded me I was still alive when others weren't. Survivor's guilt, they called it, but guilt isn't what I feel anymore. Something closer to reverence, like I'm not just living for me, but carrying the pulse of those who couldn't, not out of duty, out of love. I must have fallen asleep that way, because I woke with dew in my hair and a bluebird perched on the bench beside my coat. Not carved, real, alive, watching me with a tilted head, as if to say, "You're still here." I nodded softly. "Yes, I am." I took a walk by the edge of the woods later, just to feel the shade, to hear the sound of leaves in conversation. That's where I found the envelope. It wasn't old, cream-colored, no name, just resting against the trunk of an old oak. I looked around. No one. Opened it. Inside, a single sentence written in soft pencil. "What you planted with pain is blooming with grace." I stood there for a long time, unsure if it was real, if someone had left it for me, or if the forest, too, had learned how to write. I folded it carefully and placed it in my pocket. It's strange, the things that wait for you when you stop rushing. A bench, A field, a stranger, a memory, a sentence that could only be found in stillness, and flowers, wild and silent and defiant, blooming exactly where you once broke. The things I never said, now growing in the open. The fifth morning arrived like a breath I hadn't noticed I was holding. No dramatic sunrise, no epiphany waiting in the sky. Just the soft hush of dew settling on every petal, every blade, every memory I'd once tried to forget. I woke with the feeling that something had shifted, not outside, but inside. Like my bones had realigned to the shape of this place, and now even my heartbeat moved to the rhythm of the soil beneath me. I didn't move at first, just lay there on the grass, arms behind my head, eyes open to the cloud-soft sky. Birds passed like scattered thoughts above me, and I counted them not by species or shape, but by what they reminded me of. That one, the quick one, moved, like my brother when we raced as boys. The slow, gliding one, that was how my mother used to stir her tea. Everything had a memory now, not haunting, not heavy, just present. Just here. I turned my head slightly and saw the bench, the flowers, the tree, the folded coat, all exactly as I left them. As if nothing here asked for anything except your willingness to stay. I sat up, stretched, and felt the old, familiar crack in my spine. But this time, I didn't groan or wince. It was just a reminder, you're still alive. I walked barefoot through the field, feeling the damp earth cool beneath my soles. Each step, a small act of connection. Each movement, an apology to the land for how long I had stayed away. I whispered things as I walked, not full sentences, not even words sometimes. Just sounds, fragments of forgiveness, half-formed prayers, pieces of a man trying to be whole in the presence of quiet. When I reached the edge of the field, near the tall stone where we used to rest after training, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. A small circle of stones, neatly arranged, like a forgotten altar. In the center, a single red ribbon tied around a dried bouquet of herbs. Not mine, not from any ceremony I remembered. But it stopped me in my tracks. I knelt beside it, touched the ribbon gently. It crumbled slightly at the edges, weathered by time and wind. I didn't move the stones. I didn't try to interpret it. I just sat with it. Whoever had placed it there, they had come with their own story, their own silence, their own form of letting go. And somehow we had chosen the same place. I looked around. No one, but the feeling of presence lingered, like the echo of a footstep you couldn't see. I left a wildflower beside the offering and whispered, "Thank you for coming back." At the bench, I found a little wooden bird exactly where I'd left it. I picked it up, turned it over in my hands, and for a moment, I remembered carving something similar when I was younger. Not a bird, but a boat for my son. Before I left, before I knew what war would do to my hands, I had painted it blue and named it Hope. He cried when I gave it to him, though I didn't understand why at the time. Now I do. I never built another one until now. I found a piece of driftwood near the stream and spent the rest of the morning shaping it gently with my pocket knife. The motions came back slowly, like a language I hadn't spoken in decades. I didn't rush. I didn't plan. Carved. Each cut, a release. Each curve, a sentence I never said out loud. By the time the sun began to lower, I had made something imperfect but real. A small boat, uneven, rough, but ready to float. I walked to the edge of the stream and placed it in the water, watched it wobble for a moment before catching the current. I didn't follow it. I didn't need to, so I knew it would go where it needed to go. It's like everything else I had let go of lately. That evening, a letter arrived, not in the mail, not under a rock or inside a tree knot, just there, sitting on the bench beside my coat. Same cream envelope, same pencil handwriting. This time it read, "Some things were never meant to be buried." Only planted. I read it twice. Then again. For the first time since I arrived, I cried. Not the kind of crying that breaks you, the kind that opens something. Let the tears fall quietly. No need to wipe them away. The flowers didn't flinch. The wind didn't stop. The world didn't ask me to hide. When I was done, I placed the letter beside the watch and the bird, and for the first time, I said everything I'd never said. Not aloud, not even in my head, but in the space between the silence and the stars. I said I missed him. I said I was afraid. I said I forgave myself, and then I just breathed. That night, I didn't sleep on the ground. I slept sitting up, back against the tree, eyes open to the moon. I wanted to remember everything, every shadow, every rustle, every moment that passed without war. And as I watched the clouds shift across the sky, I whispered something to the wind. Not for the metals, not for the past, not even for Samuel, but for myself. I was never just what they made of me. And to the wind, for the first time, answered back, not with words, not with meaning, just a breeze, gentle and warm, brushing my face like a mother's hand. And I knew, somewhere in the dark, something else was blooming. And this time, it was me. The things that stayed after the silence passed. There's a sound the world makes when it knows you've stopped running. It isn't loud. It doesn't startle. It's the sound of birds arriving without warning, of branches shifting just enough to let the light through, of water moving around stones, not in defiance, but in harmony. Heard that sound this morning, not because I was listening for it, but because there was finally enough stillness beside me for it to land. I've been waking earlier each day, not because I'm restless, but because I don't want to miss a moment. There's something different now about the way I sit on this bench. It doesn't feel like a place I come to rest anymore. It feels like part of me, as if my shadow belongs here, as if my breath helps keep the leaves from falling too fast. The flowers are taller now, not by much, but enough for me to notice. I never planted them, yet here they are. I used to think things needed my effort to grow, but now I see that some things simply need you to stop disturbing the soil. That the most beautiful moments come after surrender, not struggle. Yesterday, I found myself humming a tune I hadn't remembered in years. It came out of nowhere, gentle, circular, like the lullabies my grandmother used to sing when she thought no one was listening. I caught myself smiling at the melody. I didn't force it to continue. Let it come and go like everything else that visits this field. Later, I walked to the stream again, not for water, not for cleansing, just to walk, just to be near it. The boat I carved was long gone, but I imagined it still floating somewhere, brushing past riverbanks I'll never see, carrying pieces of my story in its curved wooden ribs. And that thought didn't make me ache. It made me feel lighter. On my way back, I took a different path, one I hadn't followed in decades, up the gentle hill behind the chapel ruins. It used to be where we held morning drills. We cursed the incline then. But now, with each step, I felt more gratitude than strain. The body remembers, yes, but it also forgives. At the top, the view opened into a memory I didn't know I still carried. The field below, the sky stretched like a quiet promise. The town curled in the distance like a sleeping thought. I stood there a long time, not thinking, witnessing. And then I did something I never thought I would. I saluted, not out of duty, not out of regret, or out of respect for everything that endured, for the ground that held my pain without complaint, for the wind that stayed, even when I didn't, for the boy I was, for the man I finally became. When I lowered my hand, there were tears in my eyes, not the hot, urgent kind, but the soft kind. It's the kind that fall when something locked for too long finally opens, not with force, but with grace. On my way back down the hill, I passed an old gatepost, still standing, though the fence it once belonged to had long fallen away. Someone had tied a ribbon around it. Blue, faded, familiar. I paused and placed my hand gently on the knot. Not to untie it, just to feel its presence. Someone else had been here. Someone else had marked this place. And in that moment, I no longer felt alone. Back at the bench, I found another note. Same envelope, same handwriting. This one said, "You don't owe anyone the version of you that survived, only the one that now wants to live." I read it twice, then placed it with the others, beside the pocket watch, the bird, the carved boat's memory, and then I sat back, closed my eyes, and listened. The field was quiet, but it wasn't empty. I could feel every name I had spoken here, every word Kai had buried, every silence that once frightened me, and I realized something so simple. It almost made me laugh. I'm not trying to be the man I was anymore. I'm simply becoming the man I needed when I buried the metals. And he is patient. He doesn't rush healing. He doesn't force understanding. He doesn't speak when silence says enough. He simply stays long enough for something to bloom. That night, I lit a lantern, hung it from the tree like a low star. Its glow was soft, not meant to light the whole field, just the space between where I sat and where I used to be. I made a small fire from twigs and dry grass, not out of necessity, out of ritual. I warmed my hands, watched the flame dance, and whispered again the names that had carried me this far, one by one. I thanked them for the laughter, for the mistakes, for the parts of me they saw when I didn't, and for never asking me to be more than just present. That night, I slept facing the tree, the metals still buried, the flowers still growing, the wind still faithful. And in my dream, I stood in a field of paper birds, each one folded from a memory I had once feared. They didn't fly away. They circled me slowly, then landed, right, to trap me, but to tell me, you made it. I woke up before dawn. No candle, no letters, no signs, just breath, just peace, just the quiet truth that, even in silence, nothing important is ever truly lost. Where I buried the metals, something bloomed, and what bloomed is teaching me, moment by moment, how to live again. The bench that waited like a friend. I don't remember when the bench became more than wood and nails. I don't recall the moment it began to feel like a companion, not an object. But somewhere between the first sunrise I watched from its edge and the seventh night I leaned against its backrest, it stopped being a bench and became a witness. There's a tenderness in repetition I've found, in sitting down slowly, exactly where you did the day interior, in placing your hands the same way and exhaling into the same silence, not out of habit, but out of reverence. As if the world is gently reminding you, you are allowed to return. I've started leaving things behind each morning, a petal, a word, a folded slip of paper with nothing written on it, just to see what it might mean. Not because I'm forgetting, 'cause I'm learning how to live without clutching. Some memories grow best when given space. Some truths only speak when you loosen your grip. This morning, I whispered something to the wind. Not a question, not a statement. It's the memory of a voice. My father's voice. I hadn't heard it in years, not in dreams, not in the echo of my own words. But this morning, it came back. Not loud, not sharp, just there, somewhere between the rustle of the grass and the low hum of the breeze. He used to call me Little Storm. I had forgotten that, said I came into the world with fists already closed, like I was fighting before I understood peace. I suppose that never really left me. No. Maybe the storm inside has passed, or maybe it just finally found somewhere to rain. There's something I've been meaning to do, Then this morning, I finally allowed myself. I walked back into town, took the long route past the cemetery gates. The iron rusted now, the nameplates faded. I didn't go in. Not yet. I wasn't ready for that particular kind of silence, but I let my hand rest on the stone as I passed. A small acknowledgement. A silent wave to the names I once recited under my breath while cleaning my boots. At dusk, at the bookstore, the one that somehow still stands. Squeezed between two newer, shinier shops, I found an old leather journal with a cracked spine, the kind that smells like stories. The woman behind the counter smiled when I picked it. "People don't write by hand much anymore," she said. I smiled back. That's why it matters. Back at the bench, I opened the first page and stared at the blankness. It didn't feel empty. It felt full of everything I hadn't said, of everything I didn't know how to say. So I wrote the first sentence, not for anyone else, but for myself. This is where I began again. The pen moved slowly, not with purpose, but with presence. I didn't try to tell a story. I didn't summarize my life. I simply described the sound the leaves made when they fell, the way the light curled around the edges of the petals, the way silence feels softer when it's shared with a tree that has seen more years than you have regrets. Okay, wrote until the ink ran out, and then I just sat there watching, listening, becoming that evening. Someone sat beside me, not someone I knew. A stranger, wrapped in a long coat, face softened by time. He didn't speak. Neither did I, but after a few minutes, he nodded toward the flowers and said, "They only bloom here." I nodded back. "I know. My brother's buried nearby," he said, eyes not leaving the horizon. Not officially, just, "This is where we said goodbye." He didn't want a stone, he wanted sky. We didn't exchange names. We didn't share stories, but we shared that bench. Two men held gently by the same soil, the same sky, the same unsaid things. Before he left, he handed me a folded paper bird. He used to make these during patrol. Said if one made it past the fence, he'd follow it home. The bird was delicate, worn from being carried too long in someone's pocket. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. When he was gone, I placed it beside the others, the carved one, the notes, the watch, the ribbon, and whispered, "You made it." That night, I lit the lantern again. Its glow was softer now, as if it too was learning how to fade with grace. I read from the journal, not aloud, but with my eyes tracing every curve of every letter. I had never realized how tender my own handwriting could look when not rushed. And then, for the first time, I addressed a letter, not to Samuel, not to the silence, but to myself. You did what you could with what you had. You carried too much and blamed yourself for bending. You are not broken, just unburied. So I knit with the name no one had used for me in decades, the one only my grandmother used, the one that always made me feel small and safe. I folded the letter and slid it beneath the bench, not to hide it, but to return it to the place that had become my beginning again. I slept with my hand on the earth that night, its palm open, no need to protect, no fear of what dreams might come. And as I drifted off, I felt the bench behind me, steady, solid, as familiar as if it were leaning in to whisper, "You've finally come home, okay?" And I had, not to a house, not to a name, but to myself, to the version of me that no longer needs medals to prove he survived, because what bloomed in that field, quietly, persistently, faithfully, was not just forgiveness, it was life. And life, I'm learning, doesn't shout. It waits like a bench in a quiet field, like a note no one signs, like a flower no one planted, like peace, quiet, rooted, real, where I buried the medals. Something bloomed, and it's still blooming even now, even here, even in me. The season that grew without permission. The 8th morning arrived with an air that didn't belong to late summer anymore. There was a change, subtle, like a thought you can't quite place. The wind came earlier. The light hung lower. The shadows stretched longer across the field, like hands reaching for something they used to hold. And I knew, without looking at a calendar or asking anyone in town, that autumn had arrived, quietly, without ceremony. Just as I had. I didn't resist it. There was a time I would have. A time when change made me brace, made my hands curl slightly into fists out of habit. But not now. Not after all these days beneath this sky. Not after all this softness. The flowers had begun to fade. Not die, just shift. Their colors muted, their heads bowed. But I didn't feel sadness when I saw them. I felt reverence, like they had given all they were meant to give and now deserved rest. I walked among them barefoot, brushing each one lightly with my fingertips. "Thank you," I whispered, not because they needed it, 'cause I did. The bench was cool when I sat, the kind of cool that reminds you something is changing, even if you're not ready to name it. I wrapped my coat a little tighter, the one that still carried the scent of cedar and wind, and I let myself sit without needing to think. That's the thing no one tells you about healing. It doesn't arrive in thoughts. It arrives in the space where thoughts quiet, where you no longer need to explain yourself, even to yourself. A young woman passed on the path, walking slowly, hands in her sweater pockets. She paused when she saw me, then offered a soft nod. "Nice morning," she said. "It is," I answered. She hesitated a moment. "I come here sometimes, and I don't know what else to do." I smiled gently. "That's why I stayed." She sat down a few feet away, careful not to disturb the quiet. She didn't ask who I was or what I was doing here. She just looked out over the field and said, "My brother left and never came back. Not in the way he left, anyway." I didn't ask questions. I just listened. He used to whistle all the time, even when it didn't make sense. I hated it when we were kids. She laughed softly. Now I'd give anything to hear it. I looked at the sky, then back at her. Sometimes I think the things we miss the most are the ones we took for granted. She nodded, eyes misting. "Do you think they know? The ones who leave? Do you think they know what stayed behind?" I took a long breath. I think the ground knows. I think the sky remembers. I think the wind carries it to them in ways we don't understand. She let out a shaky breath and wiped her cheek. "I come here because this place doesn't ask anything of me," she said. "Exactly," I whispered. When she left, she placed a small object on the bench between us. A key, old, brass, worn, smooth. "He carried this everywhere," she said. "I think he believed it would open something important someday. Maybe it will here." I watched her go, not with sorrow, but with gratitude. The kind that comes from recognizing your story in someone else's voice. I picked up the key and turned it in my palm. It didn't shine. It didn't whisper secrets, but it had weight. Real weight. The kind that's earned. I didn't keep it. I placed it beside the pocket watch, beside the notes, beside the bird and the boat and the ribbon and the candle stub. Each piece now forming something like an altar, not to war, not to loss, but to memory, to presence, to what remains when we no longer hide what hurts. That evening, I opened the journal again. "What do we become," I wrote, "when we stop trying to be more than we are?" I didn't answer the question. I just let it live there. Some questions are not meant to be solved. Some are meant to soften you. I watched as the last light of day slid across the field, tainting everything gold. Even the old scar on my hand glowed in that light. No longer ugly, just true. A line that said, "You were here. You endured." I built another small fire that night. No lantern, flame and air and breath. And as the wood crackled and sparked, I began humming again, the same tune from before, now less hesitant. I didn't know the words. Maybe there never were any. But the melody knew me, and that was enough. Then, a sound behind me. Soft, delicate. I turned and saw a child. Maybe 8, maybe 9. She held a folded piece of paper in her hand. No adult nearby, just her. I heard someone singing, she said, almost shyly. That was me, I replied. She stepped closer, then pointed to the objects near the bench. Is this a place where things go when you miss someone? I thought. For a moment, then smiled. Yes, I think it is. She sat down, cross-legged on the grass, placed her paper gently beside the bird, and closed her eyes. After a moment, she opened them. I hope he hears me, she said softly. He will, I answered. She didn't stay long, just long enough to leave what she carried. When she left, I unfolded the paper. Inside, a single drawing. 2 stick figures holding hands with the words, "Come back if you can." I folded it again and placed it among the others, and I thought, maybe don't ever come back the same. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is that something in us returns when we no longer run from the place where we buried our truths. That night, I lay under a blanket of stars, the air crisp and kind, and I whispered thank you, not to anyone, to everyone, to the bench, to the key dot to the ribbon, to the child and her drawing, to the woman and her brother's whistle, to the ground, to the metals, still sleeping beneath me, to the peace that came not with answers, but with rest. And I knew, in the stillness of that fading season, that I didn't need the flowers to bloom again to know they mattered. They had done their work, and now, so was I where I buried the metals. Something bloomed, and it is still blooming, even as the petals fall, even as the air shifts, even as I learn to let the season change without leaving with it. The things people leave when they're ready. I used to think I had come back here for closure, to bury what couldn't be carried anymore, to let the ground hold the weight I'd hidden inside me for too long. And maybe, at first, that was true, but lately, I've begun to wonder if this field, this bench, this soil, this silence, had something else in mind for me. Something not about endings, but about openings, because now I'm not the only one leaving things behind. This morning, when I arrived at the bench, there were 3 new objects arranged carefully on the stone near the tree. A blue marble, a torn piece of cloth, striped like an old uniform, and a photograph, black and white, blurred at the corners, showing 2 boys in a tire swing, mid-laughter. I sat slowly, not touching anything, not moving what didn't belong to me. I just observed. These weren't my memories, but they belonged. Here now, someone else had come to this place, felt its quiet, its caution to trust it with something too heavy to hold alone. I looked around. No one in sight, but I didn't need to see who had left them, okay? I could feel their presence in the way the grass had been pressed down slightly, the careful placement of the marble so it wouldn't roll, okay? In the fold of the photo, right where a thumb might have trembled. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the journal, turned to a new page. Kane wrote, "This field is becoming something else now, not just memory, not just silence, but a place where grief lays down beside gratitude, where stories don't need to be spoken to be understood." I sat there for a long time, letting that truth settle in me, and as the morning sun climbed higher, a man approached from the path, tall, thin, hat pulled low. He didn't look at me right away, just at the ground, at the items, at the tree. "Dan," slowly, he said. We didn't speak for minutes. Then he said, "I used to think forgetting was the only way to keep going." I nodded, not interrupting. "But I was wrong," he continued. "It's remembering in the right places that sets you free." I turned to him gently. "Did you leave the photo?" He nodded once. "That was my brother and me, summer of '72. He never came back from the Gulf, and I never told anyone how much. I blamed myself for being the one who stayed. I let the silence stretch, like fabric being aired in the sun. Then I said he'd want you to laugh again. I don't even remember how, the man whispered, but I could see it in his face. The beginning of something. It's the echo of it. Before he left, he placed his hand on my shoulder. Not as a stranger, but as someone who understood. And then he was gone, down the hill, into the day. But something of him remained. Not just a photo. The air had changed. The light leaned differently. Later, a small group came. A woman with her daughter, maybe 7 years old. The girl ran ahead and skipped through the flowers, laughing freely. The mother didn't stop her. She just watched, her hands holding something to her chest. When she reached the bench, she sat beside me and held out the item, a small woolen cap, faded green, worn. I didn't ask whose it was. She didn't explain. She just placed it gently beside the watch and the wooden bird and the drawing and the folded ribbon. Then she whispered, "He always said this was his lucky hat." I don't know if he was lucky, but he was loved. I nodded. Sometimes that's luck enough. The child came back then and offered me a dandelion. "For your pocket," she said. I smiled and tucked it into my journal. When they left, the girl turned and waved, then shouted, "Don't forget the flower." "I won't," I promised, and I haven't. The rest of the afternoon passed in a golden hush. The kind of light that makes you feel like you're being remembered by the world itself. I sat cross-legged near the offerings, the bench behind me, the earth warm beneath my knees, until whispered names, not all from my life, but from theirs. I didn't know these people, but I knew their grief, and that's enough to speak someone's name with reverence. That evening, I placed a small stone in the center of the items, not to mark them, but to anchor them. A way of saying, this is a place now, not just a moment, not just a memory, but a place where healing happens, and it is. People are finding it, not because it's on a map, but because it listens, because it doesn't ask for explanation, because it holds what others won't. And maybe that's what I've become too, a kind of bench, a kind of field, a quiet place where others can place their weight down for a while. I'm no longer afraid of their stories. I don't carry them like a burden. I witness them, and in witnessing, I'm healed too. That night, I lit no lantern. I needed the stars, unfiltered, undisturbed. I lay with my hands folded beneath my head, the scent of grass and soft decay in the air, the first sign that autumn was deepening. Quote, I'm ready, not for answers, not for closure, but for whatever comes next. When the heart stops hiding, I dreamed of paper wings, of footsteps on soft dirt, of voices returning in laughter. And when I woke, the marble had been moved, not far, just enough to catch the light, just enough to remind me where I buried the metals. Something bloomed, and now others are planting too, the place that grew around. What was left behind? I used to wonder if a place could change you, if soil could know your name, but the wind could recognize your breath. These days, I don't wonder anymore, just listen. And every time I sit on this bench, every time my hand brushes against the bark of the tree, or my feet rest in the same patch of grass where the meadows sleep, I hear the field say, you're not just visiting anymore. It's strange what becomes familiar, the rhythm of morning birds, the whisper of leaves just before rain, the sound of someone walking toward you, not to interrupt your silence, but to share it. There's a rhythm now to the way people come and go. No schedule, no announcements, just the slow, steady trickle of hearts returning to something soft. They bring things, always something small, something held for too long, a coin, a book page, a broken watch, a name written in blue ink on a torn napkin, and they leave lighter, not because the grief is gone, but because it has somewhere to rest. Now, somewhere sacred, I've begun tending to the items, not arranging them, not curating, just caring, clearing leaves gently when they cover the offerings, turning the notes face up when the wind flips them, making sure the marble still catches the afternoon sun. It's not about preservation, it's about respect. Sometimes I sit in the grass with my back to the bench, surrounded by all these fragments of lives, and I wonder what it would have been like if this place had existed when I first came home from the war. If I had sat here, holding all that heaviness, and simply placed it in the ground instead of letting it fester in my chest. I wonder what would have bloomed then. I wonder who I would have become sooner. But I don't dwell. I'm not here to rewrite the past. I'm here to let it breathe. A few days ago, a boy came alone. 14, maybe, still trying to pretend he wasn't scared of being vulnerable. He carried a shoebox with a cracked lid, sat next to me without speaking for a long while, then opened the box and showed me its contents: a collection of letters, old movie tickets, a dried flower, and a bracelet made of twine. "She left last summer," he said. "I didn't ask who. I never got to say goodbye." I nodded and looked at the box. "You brought her here." He placed the bracelet on the stone and closed the box again. "I think I'm done carrying it," he whispered. He stayed a while longer, then left. His shoulders were still heavy, but his hands were empty. And sometimes that's the first kind of healing we get. Lest a whole dot. Later that same day, a man arrived with a guitar case. He didn't speak, just sat, opened it slowly, and pulled out a photograph folded into the shape of a bird. He placed it among the others, then stood, took one long look at the field, and walked away. They come without needing anything in return. And maybe that's the most sacred kind of arrival. Don't know what it is about this place that calls. People, there are no signs, no posts online, no markers, but somehow, those who are ready, they find it. Maybe that's all this place ever wanted to be, found. Not for what it holds, but for what it allows. That evening, I sat with the journal. Again, my hand slower now, more deliberate. I wrote, "There are things in us that don't want to be healed, only held, okay? And when they are finally given permission to rest, they don't disappear. They transform." As the sun dipped behind the hills, I walked slowly through the field. My steps careful, reverent, as though I were walking through a cathedral. And maybe I was. Not one made of stone and stained glass, but one made of roots and silence and breath. And people keep coming. An older couple, his hands intertwined, leaving a handkerchief embroidered with initials I didn't ask about. A teenager who left a cassette tape. A man who pressed a feather into the soil and kissed the ground before he walked away. I've stopped trying to understand, okay? Now I simply honor it. This isn't just my story anymore. The metals I buried became a seed. And what has grown isn't mine to own, only to protect. I've started sleeping closer to the tree, not for shelter, but because I like to feel the roots beneath me. I like to think they remember my heartbeat, that they hum in response when I dream, and my dreams have changed. No more fire, no more shouting, no more waking up with fists clenched and names on my lips. Now I dream of hands being held, of laughter returning, of a young boy standing in a field with a wooden boat, smiling at the wind. When I wake, I feel like I've been visited, not by ghosts, but by those who have found their way home through me this morning. I found a new note folded beneath the bench, same handwriting. You gave your pain a place to rest. That's why others found you. I sat with that sentence for hours, not analyzing it, just letting it be true, because it is. Because what I buried here was never just metals, it was everything. I was afraid wouldn't matter if it wasn't worn or displayed or recognized. But now I know the most important things are often the ones you let go of in secret, in silence, in soil, The night came slow and golden, the kind of light that doesn't rush to leave. I lit the candle again, just one, and let its glow flicker across the items left by strangers who no longer felt like strangers. And I whispered a quiet promise. I will stay here as long as this place remembers. And the wind, as always, didn't answer. It just passed through me, gentle, knowing true, where I buried the metals. Something bloomed, and now something is sheltering, and maybe that's the most sacred bloom of all. The autumn that didn't apologize. I always thought fall would make this place feel colder, as if the leaves turning meant the peace I'd found would start to retreat again, curling back into the ground like a secret too fragile for winter. But the opposite happened. The more the leaves fell, the more whole I felt. Autumn doesn't ask for permission to change things. It just does. It lets go, completely, without looking back. And I think that's the lesson I never learned as a young man, how to release with grace. This morning, the field was covered in golden layers. Leaves everywhere, soft, crisp, floating. It's kind that don't fall hard, but drift like they've waited all year to be carried by the wind. I didn't brush them aside. I let them settle on me, on the bench, on the artifacts, even on the ground where the metal slept, because this is not a grave, it's a garden, and gardens change. I sat with my journal open on my lap, pen resting between my fingers, and simply observed. Some people still passed by, fewer now as the wind grew colder, but they still came, one by one, always alone, always quiet. A man left a harmonica, a woman pressed a single playing card, the Queen of Hearts, into the soil. Someone hung a dream catcher on the low branch above the bench, and it hasn't moved since. It just watches, like I do, and I've found that I no longer dread the silence that follows their visits. I used to think silence meant forgetting, meant absence, but not anymore. Now I know silence is what stays behind when the noise has done its part. It's what remains faithful after the grief has spoken. This evening, I sat with a thermos of tea and watched a fox pass through the far edge of the field. It didn't run, didn't startle, just walked, unafraid, confident in its right to be here, and in some quiet way, I envied that. How long had I moved through life like I didn't belong? How many years had I walked like I was trespassing on my own memories? But not now. Now I feel woven into this place, as if my breath is part of the wind, as if my heartbeat echoes in the soil, as if the stories that once clung to me in shame now grow around me like ivy, not to strangle, but to keep me still. Earlier today, a young man sat beside me. He didn't bring anything in his hands. It's just a restlessness, a weight in his shoulders that looked too old for someone his age. He didn't look at me when he spoke. I almost didn't come. I didn't rush him. I kept thinking I wasn't ready, that I'd fall apart. He swallowed. But when I got here, it felt like I'd already fallen in this place. Caught. Me. He placed nothing on the stone, nothing in the earth. Instead, he took something out, a ring from his pocket, rubbed it between his fingers for a long time. I couldn't wear it anymore. Didn't want to throw it away. He didn't say whose it was. He didn't have to. When he stood to leave, he pressed it into my palm. "Can you hold it for me?" he asked. I didn't question him. I just nodded. And when he disappeared down the path, I set the ring beside the D marble, next to the harmonica and the paper bird and the Queen of Hearts. All of it glinting beneath the filtered sun, fragments of lives once hidden, not allowed to rest in daylight. Sometimes I think I should give them names, the objects, create a map, a record, but that would turn this into a museum, and this place is not for display. It's for release, for return, for resting. A few nights ago, the wind picked up and scattered a few of the older papers. I spent hours collecting them by lantern light, not in a hurry, not to fix anything, but because I knew that every one of those slips had once trembled in someone's fingers, and that mattered. After I gathered them, I sat and reread the first one, the one I found the day after I came back. The one that read, "What you planted with pain is blooming with grace." I held it in my hands and felt something shift, not just in me, in the field itself, as if the ground sighed, remembering how long it had waited to be trusted again. And I whispered into the dark, "You're not alone anymore." It wasn't until later that I realized I wasn't just speaking to the land. I was speaking to myself, because I'm not alone, not anymore. Not with the girl who left the drawing, not with the man who brought the photo, not with the boy who buried the bracelet, not with the thousands of leaves that now blanket the place where my medals rest, and certainly not with the version of me who first arrived here, broken and heavy and full of doubt. He's still here, but lighter, rooted, ready. This morning, a robin landed on the bench beside me, looked at me, tilted its head, then flew away again. No fear, no hesitation, just trust. And I smiled because I felt like that bird had delivered something. Not a message, not a miracle, just presence. And sometimes presence is all the healing we need. That night, as the wind grew colder and the sky turned to velvet, I walked the perimeter of the field to one slow circle, one deep breath at a time. And when I returned to the center, to the bench, to the lantern, to the tree, I placed my hand on the earth and said, softly, simply, "I forgive you." And I meant myself, and I meant the war, and I meant the years I wasted pretending I was fine, and I meant the silence that once terrified me, and I meant the medals still sleeping in the dark beneath the roots. Forgiveness doesn't always arrive with a ceremony. Sometimes it arrives like leaves falling steady, unashamed, without asking permission. And if you let it, if you stop trying to catch every piece, it lands exactly where it needs to, and something begins again. Where I buried the medals, something bloomed, and now even the wind carries my name like it knows I belong. The quiet that taught me how to stay. The 12th morning began with frost on the petals, not snow, not ice, just the first silver whisper of winter brushing the tips of everything that had bloomed. It wasn't sad, it wasn't harsh, it was gentle, like someone laying a cool cloth over a fevered brow. The kind of gesture you don't fully understand until you realize how long you've been burning. I stood early, before the sun cracked the horizon, and walked barefoot through the field. The grass was crisp beneath my soles, not painful, just honest. I walked slowly, deliberately, as if every footstep was a sentence I hadn't dared to speak until now. And in a way, it was. There was something different about the stillness today. Not emptier, just more complete. It's like a song that doesn't need to reach a crescendo to be felt. I looked at the place where the medals lay. I didn't uncover them. I didn't kneel. I simply stood above the soil and breathed. I whispered, "You did what you were supposed to do, huh?" And I wasn't talking to the medals anymore. I was talking to myself. I was talking to every version of me who came before the boy with too much rage, the soldier with too many ghosts, the father who disappeared into silence, the man who stood alone in his garage with his hands shaking around nothing at all. They did what they could, and now I could do what they couldn't. Stay. That word used to terrify me. Stay. It felt like surrender, like stagnation, like weakness. I thought strength was movement, that forward was always better. But now I understand. Staying takes more courage than running ever did, because when you stay, you have to face what you've buried. And when you face what you've buried, you make room for something to grow in its place. That morning, as I sat with tea in hand and the bench pressing warm into my back, a new object had appeared beside the others. A scarf, knitted, pale green, folded neatly. No one in sight, just there, placed with care. There was a tag on it, worn and handwritten. She never finished it, so I did. I pressed the scarf to my chest for a moment before laying it gently near the wooden bird and the pocket watch and the marble and the harmonica and the ring. That scarf said everything. That healing is not about completion. It's about continuation. That sometimes the story doesn't end with you, but it asks you to carry it long enough for someone else to finish it later that day. I found myself at the edge of the chapel ruins again. The same ones we used to walk past during drills. The same ones I once ignored because they reminded me too much of prayers I'd stopped believing in. But this time, I walked through the broken arch. The roof was gone. The floor covered in leaves. But the air inside still held something sacred. Not holy in the way of dogma, but holy in the way of silence. The kind that wraps around you like arms and says nothing. Nothing, because nothing needs to be said. In the center of the ruins, there was an old wooden chair. I sat, and I just cried. Not because I was in pain, not because I was lost, but because for the first time I felt truly, completely found. I cried for the people I loved, for the people I lost, for the people who walked away before I was ready, for the years I tried to carry alone what should have been shared. Cried for the silence that saved me when nothing else could. And I cried because this broken place still stood. And so did I. When I walked back to the bench, the wind had picked up. The dream catcher swayed above the branch for the first time. Watched it twist slowly, catching gold in the sunlight. Then I noticed the journal. It had been moved, opened, a single sentence added on a fresh page. Not in my handwriting. You made room. That's why things bloom now. There was no signature, just presence, and I felt it. The confirmation that none of this had been for nothing. That the pain, the exile, the silence, all of it had been part of something larger than I could name. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I sang, no words, just melody. A slow, aching sound that drifted up through the dusk like smoke. I didn't care if anyone heard. I didn't need the sound to be pretty. I just needed it to be mine, and it was. I sang to the sky, to the field, to the meadows sleeping in the soil, to the memory of Samuel, to the boy with the shoebox, and the woman with the scarf, and the strangers who came and left, and planted pieces of themselves here into the wind. Always the wind. That night, I lay down with my hand resting gently over the scarf, and I whispered, we finish what we can, and we forgive what we couldn't. No lantern, no fire dot, just stars and roots and grace. I don't know how long I'll stay here. Maybe forever. Maybe it's long enough to become another story someone whispers. They walk through this field. But I do know this, where I buried the metals. Something bloomed, and now I know how to bloom too, even as the frost settles, even as the nights grow longer, even as the past no longer needs to speak, because I've finally learned how to stay. The 13th morning was the first I awoke, with breath in the air. It rose slowly in front of me, curling like incense in the dim light, dissolving gently into the cold. I smiled when I saw it, not with delight, but with recognition. Winter was coming. But this time, I didn't dread it. I used to think the cold meant the end of something, that frost meant retreat. But now I know winter is not death. It's quiet. It's rest. It's the moment when all that grew returns to its root, folds inward, and begins again where no one can see. And I've learned to trust what cannot be seen. I pulled the old coat around my shoulders, now frayed at the sleeves, softened at the collar. It carried the smell of smoke, of tea, of pine, and I realized something strange and beautiful. It no longer smelled like war. It smelled like here. It smelled like after. The bench had a thin sheet of frost. On it, that morning, I cleared it gently with my sleeve and sat, as always. The earth was hard beneath my boots, and the leaves had mostly fallen now, forming a golden quilt around the roots of the tree. The flowers were gone, but in their place, something else had grown. Silence, a deeper silence. Not the one that comes from absence, but the kind that arrives after everything has finally been said. It's a kind of silence that doesn't ask questions, because it already knows. People still came, even with the cold, some in scarves, some with canes, some with nothing but their hands in their pockets and a memory in their chest they didn't know what to do with. I watched an elderly woman kneel slowly beside the stone and pull a bundle from her coat. She unwrapped it carefully, a photograph wrapped in fabric, tied with string. She pressed the photo to her lips before placing it in the center of the circle. "I don't need to remember your face anymore," she whispered. "I remember your breath." And I thought, Cass, yes, that's what remains. Not just the features or the facts, but the breath, the weight of their presence, the way they linger. That afternoon, I walked along the edge of the field where the frost lingered longest. I found a stone turned upright, one I hadn't seen before. It hadn't been placed there. The earth had lifted it on its own, frost sparkling across its rough surface. I crouched and placed my hand on it. It was cold, but it didn't steal warmth from me. It just held it. That night, I wrote in the journal again. My handwriting has changed. Softer, slower, not shaky, just sure. What we bury with fear returns as something gentler. Sometimes we don't recognize the thing we once feared, because now it's feeding us. I closed the journal and placed it beneath the scarf, letting it rest. There are now too many offerings to count. They no longer form a line. They don't follow order. They sprawl, like roots, like memory, like something that didn't ask permission to grow. It just knew it had to. A page from a hymnal, a coin with a hole in it, a hand-stitched patch, a name written in crayon, a crumpled candy wrapper with the word sorry carved faintly into it. No one claims them, no one explains, and yet we all understand the next day. A young man arrived with a walking stick and eyes that looked like he hadn't slept since summer. He didn't sit, he didn't speak. He just stood at the edge of the tree line and watched. I didn't call him over, but I nodded. He nodded back, and after a while, he turned and walked away. But he left something behind. I didn't see what it was until the sun dipped. It was a small stone placed perfectly on top of the dream catcher's thread, balanced, still. I didn't move it. That night, snowed lightly, not enough to cover, just enough to remind. I stayed under the tree. No fire, just my breath, my coat, and the warmth that didn't come from outside. Because now, I carry warmth differently. I carry it in the way I look at the field, in the way I sit on the bench without needing to talk, in the way I hold the silence, like a companion, not a punishment. And I carry it in the way I no longer need answers, because the questions have stopped hurting. Not because I got them answered, but because I stopped needing to know why we leave, why we lose, why we survive. Now, I just live, and I let the questions live too, beside me, like soft animals in the snow. I no longer try to tame them, I just let them be near. The frost deepened that week. One morning, the ring, the one left by the boy who couldn't keep it, had frozen into the ground. I didn't dig it up, I let it stay. It belonged there now, not as an offering, but as part of the soil. Huh? Isn't that what happens to us, too? Eventually, we sink into the places we gave ourselves to, and those places keep us that evening. I whispered a new phrase into the wind. I'm not afraid of disappearing. And I meant it, not in the way of giving up, but in the way of finally understanding. I never had to fight to be seen. I was never invisible. I was just waiting to return, not to the man I was before the medals, not to the man I became after, but to the one who knew how to sit in the snow without flinching, the one who could look at bare branches and still believe in spring. The one who could wake with frost in his lungs and still smile, because warmth no longer has to be loud. It just has to be real. And here, beneath this tree, beside these memories, inside this body that has learned to stop running, it is where I buried the metals. Something bloomed, and now, even winter feels like part of the bloom. The field that didn't sleep with the snow. There was a morning. I woke, and everything was white. Not just the petals, not just the bench, the whole field, covered, quietly, completely, without asking for permission. And the strangest part was how still it felt, not in the way of something gone, but in the way of something deeply listening. I sat up slowly beneath the tree, breath curling in soft clouds around me. My blanket held the scent of pine and thyme, and for a moment I didn't move. I just watched. The field didn't disappear. It transformed, and for the first time in my life, understood that not everything that goes quiet is gone. Not everything that stops blooming has died. Some things simply need rest. Some things grow underground. In the hush, the bench was covered, but not frozen. I brushed the snow from its surface with my gloved hand, the wood beneath still holding the memory of warmth. I sat, as I always did, and looked out over the field where so much had been laid down. The metals, still buried. The watch, still gleaming faintly beneath its veil of frost. The journal, now protected inside a tin box I placed under the bench. The scarf, frozen into the shape of care. The marble, catching morning light like it never stopped trying. And all the other things. Offerings left by people whose faces I may never know, but whose presence has rooted itself here in this place we never named. I sipped tea that had long since cooled, but it didn't matter. The warmth wasn't in the cup anymore. It was in me, and that was new. That was enough. A quiet thought arrived then, soft and unexpected. Maybe I'm not waiting anymore. For what? I wasn't even sure. I only knew that, for most of my life, something in me had always been waiting for the past to soften, for the pain to fade, for the apology that never came, for someone to say, it's over. But it is over, not in a dramatic way, just peacefully. And now, what remains isn't waiting, it's living. Even here, even now. Up, boy arrived mid-morning, the same one who once left a shoebox of memories. Taller now, older, his shoulders had changed, not just posture, presence. He carried nothing this time, but he knelt beside the old bracelet he'd left long ago and looked at it. For a long while, he didn't pick it up. He didn't speak. He just touched it with one finger, nodded once to himself, and walked away. I watched him go, and I thought he didn't need the box anymore. Some things we let go of only when we know they're safe. And maybe that's what this place became. Safety, a resting ground for pain that asked only to be acknowledged later that day. Snow began to fall again, slowly, like ash, like feathers. I didn't move from the bench. I sat and let it fall on me, across my shoulders, into my open hands. I closed my eyes, not to retreat, but to absorb. And when I opened them again, someone was sitting beside me. I didn't hear them arrive. They didn't say hello. It was the woman who had once left the scarf. Her face was soft with time, but her eyes, I remembered them. She didn't look at me at first, just out across the white. It's beautiful, she said. Double quotes. Yes, I replied. She pulled something from her pocket, a smooth stone, etched with a single word, stay. She placed it between us. I don't need it anymore, she said, but I wanted it to live here. I nodded, and for a long time, we said nothing else. When she rose to leave, she placed a hand on my shoulder. This place kept me from disappearing, she whispered. It kept me too, I said, and she smiled. That kind of smile that says, we already know, so we always did. That evening, I walked the field alone. The snow was deeper now. I followed the trail of footprints, not mine, not hers, just countless steps left by others. And I realized this was no longer a hidden place. It had become a path, a trail of arrival, a trail of return, a trail of release. I stopped at the exact spot where I had first buried the metals, and for the first time since that day, I knelt. I didn't dig. I didn't speak. I just placed my bare palm on the frozen soil and listened. I listened to everything that had been left here, everything that had bloomed, everything that had fallen asleep, and would one day rise again. Because winter is not the end. Winter is a holding, a preparation, a reminder that stillness is not absence, but presence in its purest form. I returned to the tree, lit a small candle, placed it in the snow at my feet. Its flame was small, but it didn't falter. I watched it burn against the dark, and I said aloud, to no one and everyone, you were never buried to be forgotten. You were planted to become something more. And in the quiet, I heard the wind rise, not fierce, not cold, just enough to carry the words forward. And I let them go, because now I know how to stay. Because now, know that staying is not standing still. It's returning again and again to what matters, to what heals, to what forgives, to what blooms even beneath the snow. Where I buried the metals, something bloomed, and now, beneath winter's hush, it's still breathing, still becoming, still waiting for spring, not with impatience, but with trust. And so am I. The story that didn't end just softened. Today, I didn't wake because of the cold. I woke because of the quiet. Not the kind that startles or suggests something is wrong, but the kind of silence that settles around you like a second blanket, that whispers gently, you're safe now. The snow had deepened overnight. The wind didn't howl. It hummed, low, slow, like breath passing through an old song. I stayed still for a long time, and for the first time in all these days, all these mornings beneath this tree, I felt something new settle inside me. Not relief, not release, but completion. Not the kind that marks the end of something, but the kind that allows you to finally take your hand off the page and whisper, it's enough. I stood and walked toward the center of the field, where the offering circle had grown wide and gentle, no longer contained, but spread like memory itself. There was a new object there. Someone had been here in the night. A wooden matchbox, cricked open with a single message inside, written by hand in shaky lines. You didn't need to be fixed. You just needed to be witnessed. I knelt beside it. I didn't cry. I smiled, because yes, that was it. All this time, these years, all the medals and silence and disappearing acts and grief wrapped inside the word fine. I didn't need to be put back together. I needed to be allowed to exist, exactly as I was. And now, I had been dotted by the bench, by the wind, by the field, by strangers who came and left behind proof that they too once carried weight they didn't know what to do with. And now, it didn't feel like weight anymore. It felt like roots, something holding me, not pulling me down, but keeping me here, grounded, steady, known mid-morning. The sky opened just enough for a narrow beam of sunlight to stretch across the snow. It touched the bench, it touched the tree, and I walked toward it without needing to hurry. I placed my hand on the bark, closed my eyes, and thanked it, not for holding me, but for waiting. Later, I sat on the bench again, the one that now curved slightly from time, the one whose wood had darkened from seasons, the one whose silence had never asked for anything in return. And I ran my fingers over the carvings that others had added over the months. A name, a heart, a sentence that read, he was softer than he knew. I don't know who wrote that one, but I knew it was true. Maybe all of us are softer than we know. Maybe life is what hardens us, not because we're weak, because we weren't taught how to hold our softness with pride. But here, on this field, under this tree, among these objects and stories and breaths left behind, softness is what remains. And what a holy thing softness is. I watched two deer cross the hill slowly, pausing at the edge of the trees. They didn't move quickly. They didn't startle. They saw me, and they stayed. And maybe that's the lesson I was always meant to learn, that staying is the bravest thing of all. Not running, not proving, not hiding, just staying. When the wind shifted, I stood and walked to the place where I'd first laid down the metals. I didn't dig them up. I never will. But I did something I had not yet done. I placed my hand to the ground and said my full name aloud. All of it. First, middle, last, and said it with reverence, with honor. Not because of what I survived, but because of who I had become after. Not louder, not bolder, not more, just truer. I sat in the snow a long time. The cold didn't sting anymore. It simply reminded me I was alive, present, here and then. I wrote my last entry in the journal, not because the story had ended, but because the writing no longer carried urgency. I didn't need to chase meaning anymore. Now I could simply live it. The page read, let the metals sleep. What they carried, I no longer need. Let the stories stay here. What they meant, I now understand. Let the wind speak. I no longer need to shout. Let the earth hold what I've released. I am not unfinished. I am unfolding. I closed the journal, gently placed it back in its resting place, and sat once more in stillness. I heard birds above me, just one, at first, then two. Their wings cut through the cold like memory through fog, and I thought, even now, something is still arriving. Even now, something is still blooming, not with color, not with petals, but with presence, with love that no longer asks to be named, with grief that no longer begs to be resolved, with peace that no longer needs permission to stay. That night, as the snow fell, again, I lit one final candle, the same one I had been saving since the first frost, and I whispered into the dark, if anyone finds this place when I'm gone, know this, you're allowed to rest here. You're allowed to speak or say nothing. You're allowed to cry or not understand why. Just be, just breathe, just let it hold you like it held me. I placed the candle in the snow, let it burn, let it fade, and I lay back beneath the tree, eyes open to the stars. No fear, no questions, only the hush of something that had never left me, even when I tried to leave it. Where I buried the metals, something bloomed, and now, so have I.